Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website at arh.noaa.gov. Get any updates to our forecast there. You can also get any watches, warnings, advisories that we have out, and as we update those throughout the day, you can check them there as well. Our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get the updates to the forecast through that means as well, and you can follow us on both Twitter and on Facebook. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, starting off in the western part of the state near the Aleutian Islands there, we have our main low pressure system pushing off to the east, bringing a lot of rain. You can see the front out with that system, pushing rain into the central Aleutian Islands as well and parts of the Bering Sea. As we watch this loop again, we can really see it training in all the warmer air from the south, bringing in a lot of rain and keeping the snow and rain mix pushed off further to the east. As you look out over mainland Alaska, starting off in the southeast part of the state, the eastern Gulf there, we have another low that is bringing a lot of rain to places throughout the Panhandle, and that is also bringing some warmer air from the south, keeping that all rain as well. Then out over the mainland, we don't have a whole lot of activity in terms of precipitation right now, but you can see some of those lower clouds, and that's because of those the darker colors there as opposed to these lighter colors that we have out over the eastern parts of the Gulf. Moving into the remainder of today's weather, we have our low that is sitting out in the eastern Gulf right now, bringing in some rain to the southeast part of the state. There is a chance of seeing some isolated thunderstorms through much of the central part of the Panhandle, and that does extend just to the shoreline there, parts of the eastern Gulf as well. As we move over the south central part of the state, not a whole lot of activity in terms of precipitation, although we do have some cloud cover remaining, especially as we get further inland. Then as we move into the interior part of the state, not a whole lot of precipitation there as well until we get way further off to the east, extending up into the upper Yukon Valley there. We are going to see some snow showers throughout the remainder of today. Then up along the Arctic coastline, snow and fog is the predominant condition, but there is a chance of that mixing in with some light freezing drizzle as well, all the way along the Arctic coastline. As we move down the western part of the state into the Kotzebue Sound area, further off to the east, we are seeing some isolated snow showers extending off closer towards Ambler, and then down in the Norton Sound area on the southern parts, we are seeing some snow down there as well. Moving towards the Bering Strait down towards St. Lawrence Island, we are going to see a rain and snow mix, and that's going to continue all the way down the eastern parts of the Bering Sea just off the coastline of the YK Delta. As we move into the central part of the Bering Sea towards the Pribilof Islands, we're going to see a rain and snow mix there as well. And our larger low pressure system bringing in a lot of rain to the western Aleutian Islands, starting to push further to the east into the central Aleutian Islands as well. As we move into the evening hours, we're going to see that low continuing to push east, but still providing some rain out for the western Aleutians, and that's going to extend all the way to the eastern Aleutian Islands with a rain and snow mix as we get into the Alaska Peninsula. We are going to continue to see a rain and snow mix for the Pribilof Islands as well, but as we get closer towards the Bristol Bay and YK Delta areas, not a whole lot of precipitation expected for tonight, and that will extend down towards Kodiak Island as well. As we move up further to the north, Gamble area, going to continue to see the rain and snow mix, and then all the way along the Arctic coastline, going to see predominantly the snow and fog mixture, but still a chance of seeing some light freezing drizzle with that as well. Then down to the south of the Brooks Range, we are going to see widespread fog throughout much of the interior. Pretty patchy, pretty light, but all the way out down around the Alaska Range. And then as we get further to the east, going to see that mixing with some snow out there. And then down in the Alaska Range and further to the south, going to start to see some precipitation come back over the nighttime hours. And that's going to be snow as we are further to the north towards the Talkeetna area, becoming more rain as we get into the Prince William Sound and eastern parts of the Kenai Peninsula. Then as we move into the southeast part of the state, extending from Yakutat now all the way through the Panhandle, we are going to see some widespread rain with a chance of those isolated thunderstorms continuing through the overnight hours for central parts of the Panhandle. That takes us into Thursday, where we have another low coming in from the south, bringing in more rain to areas around the southeast, extending still all the way towards the Yakutat area and along the Gulf Coast. As we get into the Prince William Sound area, especially out to the west, we are going to see some of that mixing with snow. Then the western parts of the Kenai Peninsula are going to remain rain, but as we move towards Talkeetna, that is going to start to mix with snow again. Then north of the Alaska Range, going to continue to see fog throughout the day on Thursday, mixing with snow as we get into the upper Yukon Valley. And then north of the Brooks Range, we are going to see snow and fog continuing to be the dominant condition along the Arctic coast, down into parts of the western Kotzebue Sound area, but eastern parts of the Kotzebue Sound not going to see a whole lot of precipitation, and that's true for the Norton Sound as well. And as we move out towards St. Lawrence Island, going to see some snow continuing there, extending up towards the Tin City area. Down in the YK Delta area, not a whole lot of precipitation expected, but as we drop down into the Bristol Bay area, a mixture of rain and snow extending down into the peninsula, and then as we get further off to the east, a little bit warmer there for Kodiak Island, going to see rain out there. And then our main low continuing to track to the east, bringing in some rain to places all the way along the eastern Aleutian Islands, and the northerly flow now bringing in some rain throughout the western Aleutian Islands, with a rain and snow mix continuing at the Pribilof Islands. As we move into Friday, northerly flow throughout much of the Bering Sea and into the Aleutian Islands, bringing a rain and snow mixture for most locations. A little bit warmer in the central Aleutian Islands, only expecting to see some rain there. But as we move up along the coastline, YK Delta, again, not seeing a whole lot until we get closer to the Norton Sound. Going to see some snow over in that area. And then St. Lawrence Island, continuing to see a chance of snow there. And as we get further to the north, all the way along the Arctic coast, and that is including the parts of the western Brooks Range, going to see snow up there. And then the southeastern part of the Brooks Range also going to see some snow. Much of the rest of the interior should be pretty clear and dry. And as we drop down into the south central, not a whole lot of precipitation there until we get to the Kenai Peninsula area, where western parts of the Kenai Peninsula area we are expecting to see some rain, and then a rain-snow mix on the eastern side. Down in the Kodiak area, expecting to see some rain there. And then now we have some continued rain in the southeast part of the state, but that is starting to push more towards the south now. Some of the areas such as Haines and Skagway not expecting to see any rain for Friday. So look at our temperatures now. As of 2 p.m. this afternoon, all around 50 degrees, a little bit warmer as we get closer towards the water there. 53 for Sitka, 54 for Ketchikan, 52 for Yakutat. Then along the Gulf Coast, going to see temperatures right around 50 degrees, moving into the south central part of the state, dropping down as we get further inland. And Talkeetna is seeing 36 right now, and then 27 at Glenallen, a little bit colder there. Taking us into the interior in the mid to upper 20s most locations, a little bit warmer there at Tanana at 30 degrees, and then as we get into the pass, only 18 degrees there. A little bit warmer actually on the North Slope coast. We have temperatures in the mid to upper 20s, with Wainwright being all the way up there at 28 degrees. Then as we move further to the south, Kivalina only at 17 degrees, getting into the 20s for much of the rest of the Kotzebue Sound area, and Shishmaref all the way up to 34 degrees. Down in the Norton Sound area, right around 30 degrees there. And as we drop down into the YK Delta area, seeing temperatures around 30 degrees, a little bit warmer as we get closer towards the coast, 34 degrees at Macoriac. Down in the Bristol Bay area, right around freezing, till we get down into the Alaska Peninsula, seeing temperatures rise to about 40 degrees there. Cold Bay 39, 41 for Sand Point. Then moving into the Aleutian Islands, 41 for Dutch Harbor, 46 for Atka and 43 for Adak, 45 for Shemya way out to the west, and 39 for St. Paul, 37 for St. George. Looking at our lows tonight, staying out in the west, we have temperatures dropping down to the lower to mid 40s out in the Aleutian Islands, all the way down to the mid 30s as we get closer to the Alaska Peninsula, mid 30s for the Pribilofs as well. Then down into the Bristol Bay areas, we have temperatures dropping down to the mid 20s, a little bit warmer there for Iliamna, only getting down to 31 degrees tonight. Then into the mid 20s for much of the YK Delta. Again, a little bit warmer as we get along the coastline, only getting to 30 degrees there for Macoriac. In the Norton Sound area, dropping down into right around 20 degrees for most locations. As we get into the Kotzebue Sound area, around 20 degrees there as well, however, a little bit warmer as we get further to the west, 28 degrees there for Shishmaref, and then dropping down into the teens as we get further to the east. Along the Arctic coast, having temperatures drop down into the lower 20s there. A little bit warmer actually tonight for Barrow, only getting down to 29 degrees. Down into the interior, staying in the teens for most locations. Tanana only getting down to 24. Then as we get into the south central locations, temperatures dropping down to around 30 degrees for most locations. A little bit colder still for Glen Allen, getting all the way down to 21. And then down into the upper 30s along the Gulf Coast, a little bit warmer there. Seward down to 39, Homer down to 38, and 35 expected low tonight for Kodiak. And in the southeast part of the state, dropping into the mid 40s, a little bit colder as we get further to the north. 38 expected low for Haines tonight. And then highs for tomorrow, getting up to around 50 degrees. Once again, warmer to the south and colder to the north. 48 expected high for Juneau tomorrow. And as we get into the south central area, into the mid 40s there, Cordova getting up to 44 degrees. Staying in the 40s for many of the locations in the south central except for Glen Allen, and once again only getting up to around 33 degrees. Into the interior part of the state, getting up to right around freezing, and as we get further to the north, staying a little bit colder there, only getting up to 16 degrees through the pass, and then up along the Arctic coastline, getting into the mid to upper 20s there. Wainwright getting a little bit warmer, 32 degrees expected high tomorrow. In the Kotzebue Sound area, mid to upper 20s, a little bit warmer as we get further to the west. In the Norton Sound area, around 30 degrees there, and staying around freezing as we drop down into the YK Delta. Bristol Bay area getting up into the 40s there, and then warmer into the mid to upper 40s, warmer as we get further off to the west in the Aleutian Islands, and 40 degrees expected high tomorrow for St. Paul. Switching it up now, we're going to look at some aviation weather. Starting out west, we have widespread MVFR conditions and some IFR conditions associated with that low pressure system and the front, and this is expected to move off to the east as time moves on for the day tomorrow. Up along the Arctic coastline, we are going to see some MVFR and IFR conditions there due to that fog and snow that is expected for tomorrow for them. And then as we go down into the southeast part of the state, widespread MVFR conditions due to that low pressure that we see out in the eastern parts of the Gulf of Alaska. Taking a look at the passes now, Anaktuvik should be VFR throughout the day tomorrow. Adigan Pass should also be VFR for tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill both expected to be VFR, as well as Rainy Pass. And Windy Pass should also be VFR throughout the day. Isabel Pass, VFR for tomorrow. Mintasta Pass, VFR as well. Tanita, VFR conditions expected. Portage going to start off in VFR, but raise up to VFR conditions tomorrow. And then Chilkoot and White should both be down in MVFR conditions throughout the day. Taking a look now at our freezing level, we have some warmer air coming up from the south with that low pressure that we have out in the eastern parts of the Gulf. But the main surface freezing line hugging along the Gulf Coast, then going up the eastern side of the Bering Coast, and then up into areas around the Bering Strait, then off into Russia. We also have another area of warm pressure with that other low bringing in the warmer air from the south, pushing in over the central Aleutian Islands. Taking a look now at our icing, staying out in the Aleutian Islands from the western Aleutian Islands all the way out through the eastern. We have some icing expected above 9,000 feet there. Then down from the Bering Strait into Norton Sound area and northern parts of the YK Delta, including St. Lawrence Island above 5,000 feet there. Along the Arctic coastline and extending down to eastern parts of the interior, all the way to just north of the Alaska Range above 5,000 feet there for tomorrow. And then some more icing down in the southeast just to the east of Yakutat, extending through the remainder of the southeast above 9,000 feet for tomorrow. Taking a look now at our jet over mainland Alaska, not going to see a whole lot of activity for the jet, but as we get to places in the southeast, we are seeing some southwesterly flow around 90 knots there, exiting out into Canada. But the main part of the jet is just to the south of the Aleutian Islands, getting up to as high as 150 knots out of a westerly direction. But there is a branch of the jet extending down over the western Bering Sea and the western Aleutian Islands, about 75 knots there out of a northwesterly direction. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, we have northeasterly flow over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, anywhere from 30 to 45 knots, strongest as we move further out to the west. Over mainland Alaska, we have a southerly flow, 20 to 25 knots there, becoming more easterly as we get further into the state, 10 to 20 knots, a little bit weaker further to the north until we get off the North Slope coastline. We're going to see easterly flow around 20 knots there. Then over the southeast, southerly flow around 30 knots, but there is some stronger winds along the coastline as high as 60 knots further to the south. So drop down to 3,000 feet, that continues 65 knots, but coming down to around 40 knots as we get over the Panhandle, and that's going to continue up into further parts of the northern part of the state, 25 to 30 knots there, becoming more easterly. So you look over mainland Alaska, 15 to 20 knots there, becoming easterly, exiting out into the Bering Sea. And then northerly flow, 35 to 45 knots out over the western Bering and Aleutian Islands. So you take a look at our turbulence now for the western Aleutian Islands, extending down to the eastern Aleutian Islands with that low pressure we have out there. So we are expecting to see some moderate turbulence below 4,000 feet there. No turbulence expected over mainland Alaska, but just to the south of the Panhandle, we are expecting to see some moderate turbulence there below 6,000 feet due to those stronger winds. And if you stay with us, we'll be right back with the marine forecast.
There are some important things we can all do to avoid runway incursions. Things we probably all know, or have known but forgotten, or that we sometimes overlook because of distractions. Some of these things are simply plain old common sense. Always look, listen, and expect the unexpected. Minimize distractions by keeping a sterile cockpit while taxiing. Know where you are and where you're going. Never guess. Always know. And if you don't know or are uncertain, always ask. And that brings me to a word or two about the best ally we pilots have at Howard Airport, the air traffic controller.
Runway 25 left at Delta position and hold traffic on the Delta.
These are the professionals dedicated to leading us safely through the often complex and confusing runways and taxiways and traffic of a Howard Airport.
This is 6-0 Papa turning base at the 605 freeway, report turning final.
The pace of air traffic communications can be confusing, even overwhelming. We should not feel hesitant to ask controllers to repeat an instruction, to ask for progressive taxi instructions if we need them.
Narrow ground, Cherokee 32123, request progressive taxi instructions, please. November, Charlie, Bravo.
If you don't know, ask. If you aren't sure, verify.
When communicating with air traffic control, always listen before you transmit.
Cessna 3284 Delta, holding position, runway 19 right.
Also, listen to what the controller is saying to other aircraft. It can have a critical bearing on your safety. Again, maintaining situational awareness at all times is key. Be sure you understand all air traffic control instructions. If you receive a clearance you don't understand or is contrary to your position on the airport, you should verify the clearance.
Cessna 4530 Sierra Papa. Runway 19er full length, clear for takeoff.
Air Tower, Cessna 453 Sierra Papa. Is at Bravo 3. Verify we're still cleared for takeoff.
Cessna 3 Sierra Papa. Negative, hold your position.
43 Sierra Papa. Holding short, runway 19 at Bravo 3.
Runway incursions occur most frequently when pilots enter or cross a runway without authorization. Typically, communication between the pilot and air traffic control is good. Pilots hear and read back hold short instructions and know what they're supposed to do.
Cessna 93018, hold short, runway 26 right.
But they cross hold short lines or taxi on the runway without authorization anyway. always read back all hold short instructions.
Arrow 1504, hold short, runway 6 left.
Arrow 1504, hold short, runway 6 left.
A simple Roger won't do. This applies to position and hold and clearances to enter a runway as well.
Cessna 80138, position and hold, runway 25 left.
Cessna 80138, position and hold, runway 25 left.
We can avoid most runway incursions by reducing distraction in the cockpit while taxiing, familiarizing ourselves with our departure and our destination airports, and staying alert at all times.
Be sure to write down taxi instructions, but never do it on the move. It can be a distraction. The same is true with checklists. Conduct them while stopped, never on the move. Pilots, controllers, and drivers all rely on their eyes as their primary sensors. And the simple fact is, our eyes don't work as well at night as they do during the day. The visual acuity we lose at night, combined with inconsistent cockpit lighting, canopy reflections, and possible rain, snow, or fog, make taxi, takeoff, and landing operations that seem easy during the day a real challenge at night. Pilots should observe a few simple lighting standards that will help those around them maintain their situational awareness. When taxiing into position and hold, turn on all exterior lights except landing lights. This will make your aircraft more conspicuous to other aircraft on final. Don't turn on your landing lights until you have been given clearance to take off. If you see an aircraft with its landing lights turned on, it's a clear signal that that aircraft is moving or is about to move down the runway for takeoff. When instructed to cross a runway, turn on all lights, including landing lights. The exception would be if your lights would interfere with someone holding or approaching from the other side of the runway. Also, when you line up for departure at night, consider lining up about 3 feet to the left or right of center line, so another pilot on final can more easily distinguish your aircraft from the runway lights.
Welcome back for the marine portion of the forecast. Starting off along the Arctic coast, we do have ice all the way along the shoreline now, with the main part of the sea ice not too far away. But the big story is in the last week, we do have ice forming all around the Kotzebue Sound area and along northern parts of the Norton Sound. So keep an eye on that if you're in those locations. As we take a look now in the southeast part of the state, we have flow out of the north in the Haines and Skagway area, extending down around 20 knots there. Down near Ketchikan out of a southeasterly direction around 25 knots, and southeasterly flow 20 to 30 just off the coastline. But we do have the chance of those thunderstorms getting into those marine zones, especially along the coastline. And as we move into Friday, flow switching up, becoming a little bit more northerly for eastern parts of the Gulf. Up near Yakutat area, 20 knots out of the east with some higher gusts in that location as well. As we move into the inside waters, northerly flow 25 knots closer to the Haines Skagway area. As we move further to the south-southeasterly flow 25 knots, getting some stronger gusts as we get further to the north in those locations between Juneau and Petersburg. Then in the south central for Thursday, pretty weak flow throughout much of the area, 10 to 15 knots, with seas only getting up to about 5 to 6 feet. Then in Friday, things switching up a little bit, becoming more north-northeasterly, getting up to as high as 25 knots now in the western parts of the Gulf, and seas now getting up to 7 to 8 feet. Out in the further west locations, we do have northerly flow 10 to 15 knots there. Seas only getting up to as high as around 5 feet to the west of the Barren Islands. So look down in the Alaska Peninsula, pretty light and variable flow to the east of Chignik, but as we get into the Bristol Bay area and further to the west, getting up to around 25 knots there. Southeasterly flow becoming more northeasterly as we get closer to the Cold Bay area, and then southeasterly flow 30 knots with seas as high as 8 feet near the King Cove area. As we move into Friday, flow becoming more northerly all the way around, 15 knots as we get into Bristol Bay, becoming higher as we get further to the south, up to as high as 30 knots. And then seas higher on the Pacific side, 8 to 12 feet, only around 2 to 8 feet on the Bering side. Looking into the Aleutian Islands, flow pretty strong out in the west, 40 knots out of a northwesterly direction, 22-foot seas. And as we get further to the east, that'll dropping down, getting around to 25 to 30 knots as we get closer to Dutch Harbor. And that takes us into Friday, where flow becoming more northwesterly with the stronger winds now further to the east, up to as high as 30 knots there. Seas 17 to 18 feet, but dropping down to around 11 to 13 feet as we get further to the west, and winds only around 25 knots out of a northwesterly direction. Out over the west coast of the state, we have primarily north-northeasterly flow, anywhere from 15 to 25 knots, the strongest being out to the west. Seas anywhere from 3 to 7 feet, once again being the highest as we get further out to the west. Then for the west coast on Friday, we have primarily northerly flow, anywhere from 20 to 30 knots, still strongest out to the west, with seas continuing to be the strongest out west as well, 10 to 11 feet there. All the way along the Arctic coast, easterly flow 25 to 30 knots, becoming northeast as we get further towards the Point Hope area, dropping down then as to around 15 knots there, and 5 to 8 foot seas, strongest all the way along until we get around to the Dead Horse area, dropping down a little bit to 6 feet there, but freezing spray throughout all of these locations. And that's going to be true on Friday as well. Freezing spray extending out in the Beaufort Sea down around the Shishmaref area. Northeasterly flow predominantly 25 knots there. 7 foot seas is the predominant condition. Then for tonight, we have rain throughout the Aleutian Islands, mixing with snow as we get further to the east. A snow, fog, and potential of freezing drizzle up along the Arctic coast. Widespread fog throughout the interior with some snow out east. South Central, going to see some snow transitioning over to rain as we get further to the south into Prince William Sound area. Then rain throughout the southeast, with potential for some isolated thunderstorms in the central parts of the Panhandle. Then for Thursday, widespread rain continuing for the southeast, extending into the south central with some snow there, and then fog throughout the interior, getting some snow and fog along the Arctic coastline into eastern parts of the interior. And with Alaska weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.